What's up, everybody? We are back for another episode of Monday's Middle-earth as we read our way through The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, and the Silmarillion. We are in the Silmarillion these days, and we are officially starting the Quenta Silmarillion today. This opening segment says here, the history of the Silmarils, and we're going to be getting into of the beginning of days in this chapter. Now, I don't know how far we're going to get because when we do these, I try to keep them around 15, 20 minutes long, so just kind of wherever I see a natural breaking point. But if you've ever watched one of these before, I do sort of a read through while analyzing, asking questions about things I might not remember from my read through, 20 some years ago in the late 90s. And for those of you who might know more about it than I do, you can answer in the comments below. It works. It's been working pretty good for a year and a half or so. We've been doing this series. If you end up liking this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this. Of the beginning of days, the Quenta Silmarillion, Chapter 1. And we start off here being told that among the wise, it is said that the first war began before Arda was full shaped and long before there was anything that grew upon the earth. It says here, in the middle of the war, a spirit of great strength and hardihood came down to aid the Valar, known as Tulkas the Strong, and Melkor got a little scared and ran like a little girl and actually left Arda. And it says there was peace for quite a long time. It says for a long age. I don't know how long a long age is with Tolkien. But it says here that Tulkas remained and became one of the Valar of the kingdom of Arda, while Melkor spent his time brooding in the darkness, upset at his lot in life, and he grew to have great hatred for Tulkas. It says around the same time the Valar began to bring order to the seas and the lands and the mountains, with Ivanna planting the seeds that she had long devised. And then after that, when the fires had been subdued and there was no need of light, Aule wrought two mighty lamps for the lighting of the Middle Earth, which he had built amidst the circling seas. And it says here the Varda filled those lamps, Manwe hallowed them, and then the Valar lifted them up higher than any of the mountains of the later days, one raised near to the north, named Iluien, and the other raised in the south, named Ormal. And the light of these lamps flowed out over the entirety of the earth, so it was all lit as if it was in a never-ending day. So there was no night at this time in Arda. The seeds that Yavanna had planted had begun to grow. Beasts came forth and walked. The plains filled the rivers and lakes, walked in the shadows of the woods. It says here, as of yet, however, no flower had bloomed, nor any birds sung, for these were waiting until Yavanna had given them permission to go forth. It says, nowhere was there more richness of all of these things than in the middle of the earth where the lights of the two lamps met and blended. And it says here upon the Isle of Almaran in the Great Lake dwelled the Valar when everything was very, very young. And it says here they were content for a very long time. Okay. Man, vagueness of time always drives me nuts because it's like, how long of a time? 7,000 years? 700 years? 70 years? It says here, Manwe ordered a great feast eventually, and all of the Valar came at his bidding, but Aule and Tulkas were tired because they had been working non-stop since the creation of all these things. And meanwhile, Melkor knew he knew everything that had been going on because he had spies everywhere in the Maiar and beyond. And he gathered to himself spirits out of Ea that he had perverted to his service. And he came back to Arda after his long exile, and when he came back, he's looking down at this, right? He's looking at the beauty of the earth and the spring, and it just filled him with more hate. That I wanted to build this, and I wanted it to be. Why does he get to have all the glory? Arr. So see, the Valar were gathered in Almaran, fearing no evil, and they could not perceive the shadow of Melkor because it was so far off into the north. And it says here that during the feast of the Spring of Arda, Tulkas wed Nessa, the sister of Orome, and eventually slept because he was finally weary and content. And this is when Melkor said, "Ah, my time has come." And he crossed over the walls of the night with his host and came into Middle-earth, far to the north where no one was aware of him, and began building a deep, vast fortress beneath the mountains where the beams of Iluin were cold and dim, and he called this place Utumno. Is it Utumno or Autumno? And the Valar knew nothing of it. It says here, even though nobody knew anything, though, that the evil of Melkor was so fierce that it just spread out, and the Spring of Arda was marred. It says green things began to fall sick. Um, Forests grew poisonous, full of flies, beasts of fear. And the Valar eventually became aware that this has to be the work of Melkor. And this is, it says here, they began to look for his hiding place, but he trusted in the strength of his fortress and the might of his servants, and came out ready for war. And he struck them before they had even prepared themselves for a battle. And at the same time, it says he assailed the lights of Iluin and Ormal, casting down their pillars and breaking their lamps. And in the midst of all this, the seas rose up, the land broke, the lamps spilled, and their flames poured out over the entire earth. And it says that the shape of the land was changed. And in this confusion, he escaped. Although it says here he was terrified as he was escaping, because over all of the roaring of the seas and everything, he could hear Manwë and Tulkas. But he was able to make it back to his fortress before Tulkas could get to him, and he hid there. And it says here that the Valar couldn't overcome it at this point in time, because they needed to use their strength to help the earth heal and calm the seas and the storms and the rending of the earth and everything else. Um, and it says here, afterwards they feared to rend the earth again until they knew where the children of Ilúvatar were dwelling. Because at that point in time, they had not yet come into. How do I understand how they say this? They were not yet come to life. No, they were yet to come in a time that was hidden from the Valar. So they were just preparing the planet for the children that were supposed to come later on. But they have no knowledge of when that time is going to come. That's very interesting. It says here that's the end of the spring. I'm looking ahead. Yeah. That might be a good breaking point, everybody. We're 9 minutes in, and I don't know how big this chapter is, because then we're getting that's just the spring, and now we're getting into a whole bunch of other stuff. Let's go ahead and I think one of the things I want to question here: does anyone know how great of a time was the Spring of Arda? Does anyone know? Is the timeline mentioned later in the book? Because there was a lot of very vague. They didn't know when, they didn't know this, a long age, many ages. What's the reference of time here for this, the Spring of Arda? I'd love to know. Um, the other thing too here is when you look at the interesting thing for me is the fact that the Valar didn't know where the children were, and so we're assuming they're on the planet at this point in sleep, in slumber. And I remember reading when I was doing the dwarf episode, the history of the dwarves. I remember this thing about Aule creating these golems and then getting caught, and Ilúvatar telling him, "Okay, but they have to stay asleep until I deem them worthy to awaken because I need my other children to awake first." Um, that's it's a very curious thing to me to know that were they alive on the planet at this point? It suggests that they were in the text, and that they were in sleep chambers, or not just the dwarves, but also the elves, men, and so on and so forth. So I'm curious about a lot of different things, and the issue here is that we run into so many names and everything else that it can feel confusing, and that's why I think that the Silmarillion is better done in small chunks. So this is a quicker episode this week, everybody. Let me know your thoughts. If you have answers, drop them down in the comments below. I'll see everybody in the next episode next week. Until then, stay safe.